Hey everybody, welcome to this nuts and bolts video for the Fires of Midway by Clash of Arms, designed by Cunliffe. This is certainly not one of your more traditional war games. It's very unique. The system is very unique in itself. Nothing terribly complex going on with this game, but there are some unusual concepts that separate it out from traditional war games. So I thought it would be a good idea to kind of take a nice detailed walk through this game with you. So what we're going to do is we're going to be taking an up-close look at all the different cards that are included with this game, what all the icons mean, etc., the different components. Then we're going to take a walk through the setup for this game, and then finally toward the end, then we're going to walk through step by step a couple of turns. Again, nothing terribly complex going on, but there's a lot of steps that have to be taken as you play the game that once you get used to them become second nature, and you'll barely glance at the rule book. But when you're just getting started, it can be a little confusing. So we're going to walk through a couple of turns, and then at the end of the video, I'm going to focus in on briefly on a couple of the solitaire rules that come included with the Fires of Midway. So settle in, and I hope you find this helpful. Here are all the different types of cards that you're going to be using in the game. You've got search or destroy cards, American and Japanese aircraft cards. These are your aircraft wings for each of your carriers. You've got admiral cards, who will be commanding your fleets. Action cards. These large cards are your American and Japanese aircraft carriers that took part in the battles of 1942. And finally, there's a deck of American combat cards and Japanese combat cards. Let's have a look at these different types of cards close up. Okay, our search or destroy cards are multi-purpose cards that are used in 3 different phases of the game. They are separated for the search phase of the game. You would use this part of the card. The sortie phase of the game, where you would use this section of the card. And then the bomber phase of the game, you would use this section of the card. Now, during the search phase, which you do at the beginning of the first turn only, you'll use this section when attempting to hunt for the enemy fleet and find their whereabouts in the vast Pacific Ocean. You'll be turning these cards over and checking this section to check on your success, various results. Over here, during the sortie phase, fuel will be checked depending on the number of spaces from your fleet to the enemy's, and you will have either a closing fast symbol, or you will be counting gas can symbols. Each card has either 2 or 1 gas can, and you will be using these to determine whether or not your planes have enough fuel to reach their targets or not. We'll be going over all of this. You'll see this in action when we do our playthrough. And then finally, there is this damage chart you see down at the bottom. You'll be rolling on this chart during the bomber phase if your bombers or torpedo planes have successfully made it through anti-aircraft and covering fighters, using these charts to check for success of their bombing and torpedo runs. Having a look at some of the aircraft cards, these are your 3 basic types of aircraft. You have fighters, bombers, and torpedo planes. Let's talk a little bit about all these different icons and symbols. These dice icons here indicate how many dice this aircraft will get to roll during its attack, its initial attack. It will be rolling for a dice test against either an enemy aircraft or against an aircraft carrier. If successful, then it gets to roll the number of bullet dice. So for example, if this Wildcat were to win a dice test against a 0, it would get to roll 2 bullet dice on that 0's damage chart. Same thing, this Dauntless would get to roll 4 dice for its bomb run against the damage chart for the carrier on its search or destroy card. And 3 torpedoes, 3 dice for this Avenger. The Avenger also has a fighter capability, so if it's fighting against a 0, it would get to roll 1 dice if it were successful in a dice test against a 0. The fuel rating is here, and we'll see how that works during the playthrough with the search or destroy cans, or search or destroy cards, and the gas cans. And then down here we have the damage track for each aircraft. Now, when rolling for damage against an enemy, the shield symbols would indicate an unsuccessful damage roll or superficial damage. These bullet holes would indicate a fuel hit, and the exploding plane symbol, of course, just indicates that the plane is destroyed. Now, if an aircraft runs low on fuel or sustains a bullet hole hit in combat with either another aircraft or an aircraft carrier, it gets flipped over. Or if it runs low on fuel searching for its target, it gets flipped over to its smoking side. And as you can see, its attack ratings are reduced, and it becomes more vulnerable to being destroyed. The aircraft carrier cards, each aircraft carrier that you use in this game has its own named carrier card. And these cards are a little bit similar to the aircraft cards in that they have attack dice. These are the number of dice that you would roll in any dice test against an attacking aircraft. And then if the aircraft carrier wins the dice test, then they get to roll bullet dice for their anti-aircraft fire. 2 bullet dice here, 1 bullet dice there, number of dice depending on the number of symbols up here in the top right corner. This anti-aircraft gun graphic, that's just cosmetic there. You'll use your aircraft carrier cards to track damage on your carriers, like fires and infernos, and floods and leaks. You'll also be tracking the hull integrity with a counter on this track down at the bottom of your card, and when the damage becomes severe, when the carrier becomes crippled, it is flipped over to its opposite, to its burning side, and when it reaches the final step on its damage track, that carrier is sunk. This number up here at the top is the structure rating for your aircraft carrier, and during explosion tests, the structure rating is going to come into play, and we'll learn about explosion tests during the playthrough. Both the American and Japanese sides of the game have their own special deck of combat cards, and of the combat cards there are 3 different types available to the player. Let's have a look at them. We've got our American and Japanese combat cards. Americans are up here, Japanese down here, and the three different combat cards are distinct by the border around the outside edge. We've got carrier cards here. These are used for the player using anti-aircraft fire against enemy aircraft. These are cockpit cards. These are for air-to-air combat only. And these are bomber cards. And your bombers and torpedo planes will be using these cards when making attacks on enemy aircraft carriers. Also, two additional combat cards are bluff cards. Each player, if you're playing face-to-face, will get a bluff card. Over the course of the game, these cards will be drawn into each player's hand, and they are mixed together and randomized, and whatever the player draws into their hand, that's what they have available to play with over the course of a turn. And players will be putting these combat cards down when they go into combat against each other, and occasionally you'll be using this bluff card to either fool your opponent, or perhaps you've got a really good card in your hand but you don't want to use it yet. You'll put down your bluff card. Anyway, let's have a look at some of these symbols on the combat cards and talk about what they all mean. Okay, here's some example combat cards. We've got some cockpit cards, some carrier cards, and some bomber cards. A dice icon such as these on a cockpit card, or any card really, means an extra attack die that can be used during dice tests. So for example, in a dice test against a 0, if the American player with a wildcat were to play this combat card with his wildcat, the wildcat would normally get to only roll 2 dice in the dice test. But with this combat card, he now gets to roll 3. This picture of a 0 with the circle with the line through it cancels out an opponent's attack dice. So in that same contest, this 0, which would normally roll 3 attack dice, would only get to roll 2. Some of these other symbols, for example here on these carrier cards, this symbol with the bullseye through it cancels out the opponent player's combat card. This symbol here with the card symbols ×2 means the player that plays this card gets to draw 2 more combat cards into his hand. And then here we have a bullet symbol. That means that the player that plays this card gets to use an additional bullet dice to determine damage against an enemy when he's been successful in a dice test. Then over here on these bomber cards, some of the bomber cards are good for torpedo planes only. That would allow a torpedo plane to roll an extra torpedo die when running a successful attack against a carrier. This one would only be able to be used by a dive bomber, allowing a dive bomber to roll an extra bomb die against an enemy carrier. And then over here, and there's very few of these, this card could be used to add either 1 extra bomb die to a bomber or 1 extra torpedo die to a torpedo bomber. Next up, we have action cards numbered 1 through 8 and admiral's cards. Let's take a closer look at the action cards first. Each carrier that takes part in the battle, or island in the case of the Midway scenario, will be randomly dealt one of these action cards, and these numbers determine the order in which the carriers will be allowed to take their actions. And there's a little helpful graphic on here that shows the different types of actions a player can take. The first action would be into the wind. This particular action card allows the launch of up to 3 aircraft. The restriction being that Into the Wind cannot be selected if there is any fire or inferno damage to the carrier. That's what that icon means. Here we have battle stations. This allows the launch of up to 2 aircraft with 2 repair points made available to repair damage. And finally, there's Save the Ship, and that allows up to 5 repair points to be spent on repairing damage, and the player can immediately draw 2 more combat cards into their hand. And the later your turn, the better the numbers become for you. The later your order in carrier turns. So, for example, if you're going last, if you're going 8th, you get up to 4 aircraft. You get 8 points to spend on repairs for Save the Ship. And on the backs of these cards, it just has a graphic for how many repair points it takes to do repairs. To flip an inferno over to a fire takes 2 repair points, and to eliminate the fire counter takes 1 repair point, etc. Resurrecting a destroyed aircraft, bringing it back from the watery grave, costs 3. Doing hull repair costs 5. And we have admiral cards. During the game, one of these admirals will be in charge of each of the forces, Japanese and American respectively. The admirals, the confident player, and we'll get into confident and desperate player later on during the walkthrough, the confident player is going to be limited to the command doctrine of the particular admiral that he has in command of his forces. When a player is desperate, he won't be restricted by these doctrines. And on the backs of these cards is a list of the different actions a player can take during the admiral's phase of the game, which will also be discussed in the walkthrough. And things that can be done during the admiral's phase are a reload action where you draw up to your hand size and replenish your combat cards. You can also throw away any cards you don't want. A recovery action that can be taken that involves landing any combat air patrol and scrambling a new aircraft to fill an empty combat air patrol slot. And a restore action which awards repair points to repair damage. This is the maneuver map. This is kind of the zoomed out view of the combat area. The map is marked where both American and Japanese forces could possibly enter the game. Each carrier will get its own counter that'll be designated in the scenario. The counters have 2 sides. There is an unrevealed side, and that +1 means it takes 1 extra space in order to travel and search for the carriers. We'll be getting into that. And then the other side is the located side. So there's hidden and located. On the maneuver map, your carrier forces will be maneuvering towards each other, changing position. There is a stacking limit. You can stack up to 2 carriers together to create a task force. And over the course of the game, weather systems will develop, such as low clouds and squalls. And you'll be using these low clouds to hide your carrier when seeking out the enemy fleet. Also, this M up here in the corner, for the Midway scenario, Midway Island will always be placed in the Midway space. Let's go ahead and set up the game. Now, normally for starters, you would choose which scenario you wish to play. which of the major battles of 1942. And in the scenario description, it will tell you which ships were involved and how many and what type of aircraft belong to each carrier's air wing. For the purposes of this little demonstration video, we're just going to use one carrier per side in just kind of a made-up little learning scenario, just to show you how the game works. Also, scenarios will give you an intensity level. The intensity level of a scenario is the number of victory points that a player must achieve before the other to declare victory. The American player will be using the Enterprise and her associated air wing, and Admiral Fletcher will be in charge. Each player gets a play mat. Each player shuffles up their combat cards and places them on their playmat, along with a marker to keep track of victory points. Just for now, both players should just have it on the confident side. The Japanese player will be using the Shikaku and Admiral Nagumo. You're going to shuffle up your search or destroy cards, and then in the space that exists between where the two players have their carriers and mats set up, you're going to deal out your randomized search or destroy cards in a 6x5 pattern. And there we have it. And if you haven't already watched my review, as you can tell, this game is quite a table hog. Okay, we're all set up for our search phase. Now, on the first turn and first turn only, players will do what is called the search phase. They're going to take their 5x6 grid of search or destroy cards, and in turn, beginning with the American player, always the American player to reflect American superiority and shipboard radar, each player will take turns looking at two cards and then acting on one while choosing another one to put back face down. So let's have a look for the American player's first turn in the search phase. We've got Escort spotted, which would allow the American player to draw two combat cards. And Low Clouds, which allows us to place clouds on the maneuver map. Well, this may not be strategically the best choice, but I want to show you how it works. So I'm going to go ahead and turn Low Clouds face up. And I'm playing the American player right now, so I think that I'm going to place the Low Clouds counter right here near the American entry point. That way, when my carriers get placed initially, they can quickly duck under cloud cover and make themselves harder to spot for the Japanese fleet. Okay, now it's the Japanese player's turn. We got Empty Ocean. That doesn't help us. An Enemy Fleet. That's one of the ones we want. There are 3 enemy fleet cards in the search grid, and the first player to find the 3rd enemy fleet card will get the winning edge. Finding an enemy fleet card also allows the Japanese player to draw 3 combat cards. All right. 1, 2, 3. Of course, if you're playing face-to-face, you're not going to be playing your cards face up. You're going to keep them hidden from your opponent. Ah, this is good. Cockpit card, good for air-to-air combat, and a couple of bomber cards to help me in my attacks against American carriers. Now the American player again. Empty ocean, no good. Ah, and ready cap. This allows us to ready a combat air patrol. So that means I get to take one of my fighters, one of my Wildcats, and place it in the Enterprise's cap area. As you can see, the Enterprise can have one cap fighter in flight at any time. And this fighter's just kind of zooming around, hovering above your aircraft carrier, patrolling, waiting to protect it from attacking Japanese aircraft. Now the Japanese player. Escort spotted. Draw 2 combat cards. Or Squall. Well, the Japanese player already has 3 combat cards, so I think we're going to go with a Squall. Squalls can be both helpful and hurtful. Helpful if your carrier is on fire. You can sail into a squall and it'll put some of the fires out for you. They also hurt in that enemy aircraft and your aircraft cannot fly through a squall. They have to fly around them, causing them to use more fuel. So, as the Japanese player, let's impede the Americans here. Place the squall near one of their entry points. Okay, let's do one more for the Americans. Wake spotted. That's 1 combat card to draw. Or, aha! Enemy fleet. Yeah, they're going to choose the enemy fleet card. And we get to draw 3 combat cards for that enemy fleet card. We've got a cockpit card and 2 carrier cards to help us with anti-aircraft. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and continue on with the search phase, alternating back and forth between the American and Japanese players. Until that 3rd enemy fleet card is found, and then we'll pick it up with the rest of the playthrough. Okay, we've finished up the search phase, and as we can see, a few more weather features have been added to the map. The Japanese player was also able to launch a cap to fly patrol over Shikaku. The Japanese player found the elusive 3rd enemy fleet card. So, he will be the confident player and will start out with 2 victory points. Here's the Japanese player's hand, a nice mix of cockpit, carrier, and bomber cards, along with the bluff card that always remains in your hand. The American player, having failed to find that 3rd enemy fleet card, flips his victory point marker to desperate and places it on the 1 victory point space. These numbers reflect what your maximum hand size is when reloading your hand with a reload option. The American player also picked up a decent mix. A whole bunch of cockpit cards, 2 carrier cards, and 2 bomber cards. Now to finish the search phase, it's time to place our carriers. Now the Japanese player, once again, is the confident player, and the American player is desperate. The Japanese have the starting edge. And now when we're placing our carriers, the American player can still determine the composition of his carrier task forces. So if he had more than one carrier in use here, he could keep them separate, or he could put them together in a stack of no more than 2 carriers. But we're only playing with 1 carrier each. So the Japanese player, having the starting edge, will not only get to place his carrier on the maneuver map, but the Japanese carrier will also get to place the American carrier. The search phase to begin the game is now complete. So go ahead and clean up your search or destroy cards. Give them a good shuffle. And we're going to place them on the staging mat. Now we begin the strategy phase. Now, we've only got 2 carriers in play, so that means we're only going to use the first 2 action cards. And what you do is you're going to take those action cards and randomize them. And then deal them out, 1 for each carrier, face down. Once the action cards are dealt, starting with the confident player first, each player will turn their dealt action cards face up and then arrange them in whatever order they wish. Once both players have revealed and organized their action cards in their desired order, the confident player then has an opportunity to steal 1 action card from his opponent and replace it with one of his own. So intuitively, right off the bat, we think that the Japanese player is going to want to go first and steal the American's action card and replace it. But here's an instance where the Admiral's doctrine restricts you. The Japanese are confident. That means Admiral Nagumo's doctrine is in effect. The 1 action card cannot be stolen in the strategy phase while the Japanese player is confident. So there won't be any stealing going on for this steal step of the strategy phase. Finally, for the strategy phase, both players get to maneuver their forces. I should have mentioned that when we placed our carriers, they both get placed with their hidden side face up. So, beginning with the confident player, all of your carrier groups can move up to 1 adjacent space. Okay, with our strategy phase now complete, we move on to the carrier turns. And each carrier turn has a sortie phase, an engagement phase, a bomber phase, and a resolution phase. So, we'll take our first carrier turn, beginning with the sortie phase. Now the Enterprise has the first action card, so it'll take the first carrier turn. And here are the actions we can choose from. Now, Save the Ship would allow us to draw 2 combat cards and spend 5 points on repairs. Well, there's been no combat yet, so there's no damage that needs to be repaired. You could still choose this if you just wanted to draw 2 more combat cards into your hand, but we're okay on that for now. We're going to go ahead and choose Into the Wind. This is going to give us 3 points to launch aircraft, so that's 3 aircraft. Into the Wind must include at least 1 bomber, and Into the Wind cannot be selected when there's any kind of fire counter damage on your carrier. But again, we don't have any damage, so we'll choose Into the Wind. Okay, going through my available air wing, I've decided to launch a Wildcat to fly fighter escort and 2 Dauntless bombers. That's my initial strike force going up against the Shokaku. Having a look at Admiral Fletcher's card, his doctrine dictates that when the American player is confident, a torpedo bomber from the carrier's air wing, if available, must be included in each strike group. But the American player is desperate, so we're not restricted by Admiral Fletcher's doctrine. So we're going to send 2 Dauntless dive bombers. All right, with my strike group launched and on its way to go find and attack the Shokaku, now I have to chart the course. And here is where fuel ratings, the gas cans on those search or destroy cards, and the distance in spaces all come together to determine what kind of condition your planes arrive at their target in. So, to chart our course, we look at where they're coming from and count the number of spaces to the enemy carrier. 1, 2. But, for one thing, the Shokaku is hidden, so that's going to add 1 more. Plus, it's hiding under low clouds, which is going to add yet another 1 more. So it's 1, 2, plus 1 for the hidden status, that makes 3, plus 1 for low clouds, that makes 4 total spaces. Draw 4 cards from the search or destroy deck. 1, 2, 3, 4. And we're going to look at the information in the top right-hand corner of the card. There's a headwind. That's 1 gas can. Closing fast. Excellent. We like those. There's another gas can. And another gas can. 3 gas cans. So we're going to compare that to our aircraft's fuel rating. If the number of gas cans meets or exceeds your aircraft's fuel rating, you have to flip it to its smoking side. So as we can see, our fighter escort for our strike group, it only has a fuel rating of 2. So we're going to have to flip it over to its smoking side, which means it's gonna be less effective in air-to-air combat and much more vulnerable to damage. However, our 2 bombers are in good shape. They have a fuel rating of 4. There were only 3 gas cans, so they'll arrive at the enemy strike force with full strength. And we'll just take the 4 cards we just drew and throw them in the discard pile. We're going to be going to this search or destroy deck a lot. When you get to the end of the deck, simply take the cards in your discard pile, reshuffle, and start fresh. Okay, we've flown our course, we've hunted our target. We now flip that Japanese carrier to located. Here comes the American strike group. Now is the spotting roll for the carrier that's under attack. Japanese get to roll 1 die for their spotting roll. American carriers under attack get to roll 2 dice for their spotting roll, reflecting better American radar and detection. So let's go ahead and take our spotting roll for the Shokaku. If the die number rolled is equal to or less than the number of aircraft in the attacking strike group, the group will be spotted. All right, looks like our strike group's been spotted by the Japanese carrier. Now, when a carrier spots an incoming strike group, it has 2 options. If it has fighters available in its air wing, it can either launch a combat air patrol, or it can draw 2 more combat cards. The player can draw 2 more combat cards into their hand. Now, the Shokaku already has a cap launched that it was able to launch during the search phase. So we're going to draw 2 more combat cards into our hand. This is regardless of what your hand size limit is. A cockpit card, and another cockpit card. That's going to do it for the sortie phase. Now we move on to the engagement phase of the carrier turn. Now, if the enemy target didn't already have a combat air patrol up, the engagement phase would be skipped and you would move right on to the bomber phase. But there is a combat air patrol for the Shokaku. The American player does have a fighter escort. Now, if the strike group had no fighter escort, that Japanese combat air patrol would have a turkey shoot. That means it would get to launch 2 separate attacks against one or both of the attacking American bombers. But since there is a fighter escort, the owner of the strike group, in this case the American player, gets to choose the target for the Japanese combat air patrol. Now, of course, I want to protect my bombers. So, the Japanese cap is going to go up against my Wildcat escort. Each player selects an appropriate combat card and places it face down with their aircraft. Once that's finished, each player simultaneously will reveal their combat card and see what their effects are. Now, the Japanese Zero has revealed certain death, giving it 3 additional attack dice plus 1 additional bullet die should it be successful in its dice test. However, the American has revealed jinking roll with this bullseye symbol. The bullseye symbol completely negates your opponent's card. In addition, the Wildcat will get an additional attack die. 3 dice for the Japanese player, 2 dice for the American player. Alright, highest die roll wins. The highest die roll for the American is 3. Highest die roll for the Japanese player is also a 3. Combat air patrol always wins ties. Now, just for an example, what if both players had rolled a 5? Well, again, Japanese player would have won. But in the event of a tie, if the American player had rolled 2 5s, then in that case, the fighter escort, the Wildcat, would have won. In any case, the tie was a 3. The Japanese combat air patrol automatically wins ties. So, now we get to roll 3 bullet dice for the Japanese aircraft. We take the highest die roll, which is a 6, and as we can see, any of these dice would have destroyed the American aircraft. The Zero is victorious. The American is sent to the watery grave. Our spent combat cards go to the discard pile on the player mat. And with the exception of a turkey shoot, aircraft can only take part in 1 combat action per carrier turn. So the successful Japanese combat air patrol gets returned to the Shokaku's cap slot. With the engagement phase now complete, we move on to the bomber phase. And our first bomber rolls in to make its attack on Shokaku. Players lay down appropriate combat cards, a bomber card for the Dauntless, and a carrier card for the Shokaku. the reveal. Our Dauntless gets 2 additional attack dice. The Shokaku will get 1 additional anti-aircraft die. So it's going to be 4 American attack dice against 3 Japanese. Highest die wins. Let's see what we got. Double 6s for the Japanese. That beats the highest American die of 5. The Japanese carrier wins this dice test. Shokaku will now roll 3 bullet dice against the American damage track. Highest die is a 5. So, that's a fuel hit. The Dauntless is flipped to its smoking side. The Shokaku, however, has failed to stop the Dauntless completely. Weakened but undeterred, our Dauntless commences its bombing run. 2 cards are drawn from the Search or Destroy deck by the American player. The American player determines which card he would prefer to use for his bombing run. We'll use this one, place the other one in the Search or Destroy discard pile. Now we'll be rolling 1, 2, 3 bomb dice on the carrier damage track. Now these water geysers would only count for a hit if it's a torpedo strike. So a 1, 2, or 3 in this case would have no effect. We need 4, 5, or 6. A 4 or a 5 will start a fire. A 6 will be a critical hit. A 1, a 2, and a 4. We've got 1 successful hit on the Shokaku. Not as devastating as the American player would like, but still, the strike force from Enterprise draws first blood. But the Shokaku can't breathe easy yet. Just as the Dauntless, damaged and smoking, peels away, the next undamaged bomber comes in for its attack run. Combat cards selected. The reveal. A good card for the Japanese, but the Bloody Carnage card for the Dauntless has a bullseye symbol which totally negates the Japanese combat card. So, our dice test will be 3 American attack dice versus 2 Japanese anti-aircraft dice. An American 6 versus a Japanese 3. The Dauntless screams in, bombs falling. We've drawn 2 and selected 1 of our Search or Destroy cards. We're going to roll 4 bomb dice, needing 4s, 5s, or 6s to hit. 2 hits. A 4 and a 6. A 4 starts a fire. A 6 is a critical hit. So the 4 starts another fire. The 6 is a critical hit, meaning an inferno, and we reduce Shokaku's hull by 1 point. In addition, 2 fire tokens are combined to make an inferno token. With the bomber phase complete, we move on to the resolution phase. The carrier that was just attacked, if it has an undamaged cap in the air, it's going to suffer combat fatigue if it took part in the engagement and be flipped to its smoking side. If it had had a cap that entered the combat already on its smoking side, that cap would have to be recovered and placed back in the carrier's air wing. But our Zero here just gets flipped to its smoking side. The remains of the Enterprise strike group must make its way back to the home carrier. Undamaged aircraft are automatically returned to the carrier's air wing. And we have to make a return roll for any aircraft on its smoking side. The way to calculate that is to simply count the number of spaces back to the aircraft's launch point. We don't count low cloud counters for this. So in this case, it'll be 1, 2 spaces. So for our return roll, we roll 1 die for each aircraft that has to take a return roll. In this case, a roll of 2 or less, and the Dauntless crashes and is lost. If we roll a 1, any 1 roll on a return roll causes the aircraft to crash onto the deck of the aircraft carrier and start a fire. So, let's take our return roll for our Dauntless. We need better than 2. A 4. Excellent. All right. Our Dauntless is flipped back to its undamaged side and is recovered successfully. The Enterprise has finished her carrier turn. We move on to the Admiral's phase. Each player flips over their Admiral's card and gets to choose one of the 3 actions listed for the Admiral's phase. Now, for the time being, we're kind of liking what we have in our hand full of combat cards, and our cap is fully fueled, undamaged, and we don't need to do anything with it. So we're going to go ahead and do a restore action and take 3 repair points. For those 3 repair points, we can recover one of our aircraft from the watery grave and return it to the Enterprise's air wing. And for the Japanese Admiral's phase, I'm not liking what I got in the hand here, so I'm going to dump a few cards by using a reload action and draw back up to maximum hand size, which for the Japanese right now is 7. I have 4 cards counting the bluff, so 5, 6, and 7. Shokaku now gets to take her carrier turn. We can't choose into the wind because we have fire and inferno markers on our carrier. I still think it's too early for save the ship. So we're going to have to take battle stations. That's going to give us 2 repair points. Well, it takes 2 repair points to flip an inferno marker and turn it into a fire. So we'll just do that. It would take 1 additional repair point to remove the fire marker completely. So we also get 2 launch points. We can launch 2 aircraft. I'd really like to launch 2 bombers and maximize my attack against the American carrier, but I know the Enterprise already has a cap up in place, and I don't want to risk a turkey shoot. So I'm going to send a Zero along as a fighter escort and one of my Kate torpedo bombers. The sortie phase, we chart our course. 1, 2, 3 for the low clouds, 4 because the Enterprise is still hidden. 1, 2, 3, 4. And we've got 1, 2, And this is losing time. That's 2 more for 4 gas cans. That equals our Kate's fuel rating of 4. That's no good. We have to flip the Kate to the smoking side. Enterprise has now been located. Enterprise now gets her spotting roll. Americans always roll 2 dice for spotting rolls. There are 2 aircraft in the strike group, so we need 2 or less to spot them. We rolled a 1. We've already got a cap in the air, so we get to draw 2 more combat cards. 1, 2. So our strike group has a fighter escort. So we're going to pull the Enterprise's cap into an engagement phase with the 0. The combat card reveal. Alright. The Wildcat will be rolling 3 attack dice. The 0 would be rolling 5 attack dice. But the American combat card cancels out 2 of the Japanese attack dice. So it's going to be a fair fight here. It's going to be 3 on 3. Highest die wins. What do we got? The American has a 5. The highest Japanese dice are 4s. The American wins. So the American Wildcat is going to roll 2 bullet dice on the 0. A 2 and a 6. A 6. A rare Wildcat victory over a 0. The 0 is destroyed and goes to the watery grave. Bomber phase. The Smoking Kate rolls in on the Enterprise. Appropriate combat cards are selected out of each player's hand and revealed. Alright. The Enterprise immediately gets to draw 2 additional combat cards. 1, 2. And with destroyer escorts, Enterprise gets 3 anti-aircraft dice. With hammer and anvil, the Kate gets 3 attack dice of its own. Alright, let's see here. We've got a 2, a 6, and a 5 for the Americans, a 3, and a 1 for the Japanese. The American 6 wins. Enterprise gets 1, 2, 3 bullet dice. And we've got a 6, a 3, and a 4. We take the highest one, it's a 6. And that's going to destroy the Kate. That attack was a complete disaster for the Imperial Japanese Navy. Bomber phase complete. Our undamaged cap for the Enterprise has combat fatigue, so he flips over to his smoking side. Since all the Japanese aircraft in that strike group were destroyed, there is no return roll for any returning aircraft to the Shikaku. With Shikaku's carrier turn complete, we move on to the Admiral phase. The Japanese player is going to choose a recover action and land his smoking 0 and replace it with a fresh cap fighter. The American player is going to choose a reload action. We've got way too many cockpit cards in our hand here, so we're going to dump 3 of these cards, which leaves us, counting the bluff, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 cards in our hand. And draw back up to our hand limit, which is currently 9. So, with 6 already in our hand, we get 7, 8, and 9. Now, with all carrier turns and admiral's phases complete, we move on to the end phase, to end turn 1. Now, the Enterprise was very lucky this turn, so she won't have to go through an end phase where she checks for carnage or has to endure explosion rolls. Let's move on to the Shikaku. Now, the Shikaku's actually not too bad off either. If the hull damage counter was on step 3 at this end phase, what we would have to do is flip Shokaku over to her crippled side. But that's not going to be necessary at this point, since that damage counter is only on the 2 spot. However, Shokaku is going to have to do some explosion rolls. 2 dice for every Inferno counter, 1 die for every fire counter. So what we're going to do is roll 3 dice against Shokaku's hull rating. For every die equal to or greater than the hull rating, we will increase hull damage on Shokaku. Alright, that's 2 6s. Those are both critical hits. So what's going to happen here is Shokaku is going to be flipped over to her crippled side. The fire and inferno markers will remain in place, and the American player will score a victory point for crippling the Shikaku. Both players are now tied for victory points. Whenever players are tied for victory points, both players become desperate. Turn 2 would then begin with a brand new strategy phase, followed by carrier turns of each carrier, launching air strikes, inflicting damage on one another, fighting their aircraft back and forth, followed by admiral's phases for each carrier turn, and more end phases, until one player reaches the intensity level in victory points for whichever scenario the 2 players are playing, or till whichever end point they decide upon, or until one player surrenders and withdraws. Just a few brief words about the solitaire rules included with Fires of Midway. There are some special solitaire playmats that can be downloaded for free at the game's Board Game Geek files section. For example, a solitaire maneuver map with random die roll numbers for where weather counters would be placed. Also, the solitaire search phase is played exactly the same as the regular 2-player search phase, except the human player simply has 10 attempts to find all 3 enemy fleet cards. Failure to do so gives the starting edge to the AI. The bluff combat cards are not used. And there are also special AI playmats available for both the Japanese and American sides. And the way this works is the AI, instead of having a regular hand of combat cards, the 3 different types of combat cards are split up into their separate types: bomber, cockpit, and carrier cards. And over the course of the game, what makes this kind of cool is, for the AI, the Japanese, in this case, player will always have the appropriate card to play. Over the course of the game, you'll simply draw a combat card whenever you need one, depending on what the situation is, and when you reach the end of that mini deck, you simply reshuffle and start fresh. Again, there's also a AI playmat for the American forces as well. These solitaire mechanisms are also combined with priorities for the AI for which enemy carriers to attack and how to move their own carriers during the maneuver phase. So that's it for this little walkthrough of the Fires of Midway, everybody, with just the core rules. Hope y'all found it helpful. Until next time, happy gaming.